So ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Miss Elena Calistru from Bucharest, from Romania. From Funky Citizens, it's a very funky name, but she is a very serious person when it comes to open spending and public procurement. Elena, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's true, I really love budgets. So I'm very lucky today because I have quite a simple task. To provide gender balance to this wonderful panel and to keep the time because we are a bit late. But I want to assure you that we have three of the best experts in this area, not only from the region, I would say. They will try to provide you with very interesting and hands-on examples about how to use open data, both at central and local level. We focus on municipalities today, but I believe that their experience is replicable in many contexts. So without further delaying their interventions, I would like to briefly tell you about how we will proceed in this panel discussion. Each of the panelists will have a 10 minutes presentation. Then we're going to have a follow-up question for each of them, and then we'll open the floor for you. So be prepared to ask them a lot of questions, very specific questions, and to challenge them, because some of their projects have been running for a while. They know how to advise you on what challenges to avoid and how to manage the various changes that might be needed. So I'm going to invite the first panelist to present their project, Mr. Makovsky from the Battery Foundation, and the quite new platform that they're implementing.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Krzysiek, for inviting me, and for all of you for coming here. And I will have a very short presentation on what we did in Battery Foundation, but before I will go to this, especially this, as what I have to present is unfortunately only in Polish, but there are some people from Poland and I hope that it will be inspiring to them. But before I will go and show our achievement, I would say, I will just only make a few general remarks. Karolis mentioned that public procurement is a very important element of economy around the world. And of course, Poland is not exception from this. In Poland, public procurement is around 6 even to over 10% of GDP every year. It's a lot of money. Of course, a lot of important services, a lot of are bought through the public procurement system. I just would like to say that behind all these projects that were already presented in the first part, and behind the project or product, whatever we call it, that I would like to share with you, I think lies the idea that is built in the public procurement as a concept, that public procurement is a market. I mean, and if this is a market, then it has to be competitive. It's a very specific market because it's very, very much regulated. And of course, this is very specific because public money are involved. And this brings me to the point that if we have a market, then and it is involving public money, then it should be transparent not only to the players on this market, but also to the people, of course. And this is kind of obvious, but maybe during the discussion I will have a, let's say, basis to refer to this thought, because it's easy to be said, but then when we are coming to the practice, then this is not only the question of open data formats, I think, but also this is, I mean, keeping this transparency is also the question how to communicate and is it possible to involve people in it, I mean, in public procurement. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have. And as I said, these ideas are also behind the tool that we have created in my organization with cooperation with a private company, small private company. It's not very often practice in Polish reality when non-governmental organizations come to cooperation with private companies. Actually, in my organization, and this is quite old, like for Polish standards, because foundation was created in 1988. And I think this was the first time when we had a project that was half done with private company involvement. So this is something that says about the realities. But this is also a very important thing, I think, because we need I think, multi-stakeholder approach to this kind of projects, tools. And this is very difficult because, and I think especially in our region, I mean Central and Eastern Europe, because private companies are not very interested in cooperation with non-governmental organizations. Non-governmental organizations don't trust private companies. Sociologists like me, for example, don't have very often common language with IT specialists, and so on and so on. And when we come to this this question, for example, of open data and how to use them in a practical way, then how to put them in practice, and then how to promote them and how to sell it to the people at the local level, then many challenges come up. What I will show you very briefly, it's a kind of tool that allows you to track public procurement market in Poland. Basically, and also it counts kind of risk indicator, risk of corruption, thanks to team in which Iri was involved, DigiWist and Michali Fazekas. We have created this index for Poland. And indeed, I mean, our primary target group was, of course, contracting authorities, but not only, and especially local governments, because in Poland, every year we have 100 billion zlotys. It's around 500 million euros. I think that's going through the public procurement market. And almost half of it, in terms of number, go through local governments. In terms of amount of money, it's a little bit 1/3. So the local governments are the most important, the biggest contractor in the country. And of course, there are a lot of problems. I don't want to go in details now, but I think that those guys at the local level, especially officials, they know pretty well, I mean, what is the law and how to organize public procurement process. They manipulate very often. I mean, they are disorganized very often. I wouldn't say that they are corrupt, but there is a very interesting indicator for Poland. 90%, over 90% of tenders that happen in Poland are open tenders. So this is the most competitive competitive scheme. But in half of them, there is only one bidder. So this indicates something. I mean, there is no competition, basically. I mean, comparing to the countries like Spain, I'm very similar. We are kind of evenement. And of course, immediately we think that maybe some corruption is behind this, and probably in many cases, yes. But I think in most cases, what is behind of this lack of competitiveness is disorganization and lack of willingness to make it transparent, really. I mean, many of tenders are announced in, those who have to be announced in the national platform, then they are announced, but there are many which are below some thresholds and they don't have to be announced on the national platforms, and they are put in various forms and ways on local websites, and some governments are doing it better, some governments are doing it worse. And, but there is a lack of transparency. And if you look, for example, in the Eurobarometer from the October last year, and then and when you look in Poland, at Poland, then people, I mean, this is Eurobarometer that was done on a sample of entrepreneurs. And people declare in this Eurobarometer that the biggest challenge is bureaucracy. I mean, in public procurement. And what we wanted to achieve by this, by creating this tool, is to give some tool to, not to these officials, not in the first way to these officials who are organizing tenders, but to those citizens and those who are involved in public procurement, in general, in public life at the local level, to give them to monitor what is going on in their local communities, in their municipalities. And we created something that is called Irregularities Risk Barometer. It works. It's a website where we publish all data and some analysis. But if someone wants to check, I mean, how his or her municipality is doing, then he has or she has access to the data. It is updated in an ongoing manner. And for example, let's check, I don't know what happened, why there is no, I need a, oh, yes. And let's check Gdańsk, for example. How Gdańsk is, we have a lot of information where Gdańsk is buying stuff through the public procurement market. We can map them. There is this risk indicator is, the risk is measured from 0 to 1, and it indicates that they are somewhere in the first, in 1/3. They're a little bit above the average municipality in the country, but nothing very bad is indicating this. So we have overlook of what is contracted in Gdańsk. And we can look into the single tenders and check what is going on there. And so, for example, there is a tender quite expensive. It's 500,000 zlotys almost, and it has very high risk indications. And then we may check why it is so high. Oh, because criteria of qualification to this tender are odd comparing to the tenders that are usually in the same market and in the same type. What else? I mean, the time for sending offers, bids, it's very, very short, and so on and so on. So we may check. Any municipality, any contracting authority in the country. We may go through all tenders that are published, and our idea was to give this tool, first of all, to the local media and to the local councilmen and councilwomen. Because these people are usually not very well prepared to ask their authorities at the local level what is going on with public procurement in your municipality. I mean, what is on agenda? I mean, what is being bought and so on. And I must say that, and this will be some kind of self-critique. I must say that I am, of course, very proud of this tool, but we have a big problem with engagement of people to using this tool, and I think this is the challenge to all of us. It is quite easy. I mean, I can explain it in a workshop, on a workshop basis, I don't know, in 30 minutes, but get people involved in public procurement monitoring, it's, I think, another it's something that is connected to what we are doing here and discussing here, open contracting and open standards and data, but we have to do more about communicating this. And that's my thought.
Okay, thank you so much. You've mentioned a lot of things. You put a lot of concepts on the table. You talked about corruption. You talked about competitiveness. You talked about bureaucracy. And you talked about citizens' engagement in this.
Sorry for a mess.
I wanted to ask you whether, because all these concepts seem to, they are complicated. And is open contracting a solution to all of these issues, or do we need to put open contracting in a wider context, in a wider policy? What do you think? Do we need, I mean, should we focus specifically on open contracting, or start with open contracting or monitoring public procurement, or do we need more? I don't know, educating citizens, educating businesses. What are your thoughts about this?
My thought is that open contracting standards and open data are tools, basically. They are tools. And if we want to have more transparent public procurement, more competitive, because I know you may comment on this, but in DigiWist, for example, what was adopted as a definition of corruption was a particularistic distribution of resources and through the public procurement. So if there is no competition, then in fact we are dealing with corruption, taking into account this definition. So if we want to have more informed bidders, more informed society, more involved in monitoring, then I think it's not enough to create tools, and it's not enough to implement standards, and it's not enough to make it transparent on a technical level. I mean, we really need the involvement of the state authorities, basically. I mean, and I don't believe that we can have important change doing all of this only from the grassroots level. I mean, in Poland we have 3,000 local authorities, local governments. And as it was discussed before, I mean, we were discussing if Gdańsk was very, let's say, ahead of everyone, or if it was one of the transparency elite. I mean, the situation is very diverse, and we already have bad experience with implementing access to public information legislation. I mean, maybe Krzysiek would adapt it, but one of the mistakes that was made in 2001, when this law was coming into force, was the decentralized system of public data publication. And now we have window of opportunity, because now we are in Poland, we are having we are preparing new law on public procurement. We will have new public procurement national platform. And I am really afraid that if we stop only on this level of creating technical tools, and there is even discussion if it may be decentralized, then we will fail again. I think that public procurement system needs centralization. It should be centralized, it should be common for every level of public administration, for every contracting authority, and it should be centrally managed. Also because it will be easier and more accessible to all citizens, whatever they are, whatever would like to observe central authorities or local authorities. So, so public policy at the state level, I think it's a must. And of course, communication, education should be part of it.
Thank you for this, because I think it works perfectly for the next presentation, Mr. Nestulia from Transparency International Ukraine. I think will fit perfectly with his presentation as an answer to this challenge as well.
So before going to presentation, I would like to emphasize that open contracting data standard, to my perception, is actually the smallest thing of open contracting. Open contracting is a very wide topic which covers everything you mentioned: education, participation, cooperation, and so on and so forth. And building e-procurement system based on OCDS, in terms of technical stuff, it's very simple. Like, you know the process, you hire IT team, you develop the system. But then changing mindsets, changing perception, changing how people interact, it's a huge work which should be done after you implement these tools. And it's also covered by open contracting, so we have to promote not the standard by itself, but principles which are in the background of open contracting. Yes.
But, let's see your presentation, because I believe that I'm not exaggerating if I'm telling you that Ukraine, in terms of open contracting, is probably the star or the flagship country for showcasing what you can do on this. And I think that the examples and the experience that you have are quite relevant for this discussion.
Thank you. And actually, to prove that, not that we are stars, but to prove that open contracting principles are in the core, I always start our presentation about public procurement with this quadrant: Milton Friedman, how money could be spent. And there are like four options. The first one, when you are buying something for yourself, for your money, what you will get? You will get best value for money because you will be the end user of good services or whatever, and you spend money which you earned. If you're buying something for someone, for your money, what will you get? Of course, for you, price is more important than quality, because it's not you who will be using this stuff, but you will pay, and you are not very interested to pay more. If you're buying something for yourself or other money, you don't care about price, you care about quality, so you will definitely, or most probably, overpay. So you will not go to many supermarkets to search for the best price. You will just buy at the very first point without like any analysis. And then when you are buying for someone, for others' money, it's actually a state of public procurement. Because the problem is not about like e-procurement system, about the standard, but about perception of procuring entities and people who are dealing with procurement, at least in Ukraine. Because in Ukraine we have more than 200,000 procurement specialists, or I wouldn't say that they are specialists, it's people who has additional responsibility to conduct procurement. Like they have to do it because someone assigned them to do this stuff. And in most cases, they're not professional, and they don't really perceive budget money or public money as their money. They don't really perceive that they are the end user of something they buy. And for example, because of this perception, we have this situation. It's a nice, one of the most nicest districts in Kiev, Podil, and this bridge in such situation since like 1993. The construction started in 1993, and if you visit Ukraine, you will see just one small part added to this picture. So more than 20 years they are trying to build it. More than 400 million euros has already been spent. They plan to spend even 100 million more to finish it, and they promised to finish it by 2020. It's like 3 kilometers long, 35 minutes high. Corruption? Most probably. Inefficiency? Definitely. Non-professionalism? For sure. Coming to France. Viaduc de Millau, it's a bridge higher than Eiffel Tower. It's a bridge longer than this one. But the price of this bridge was 400 million euros. They finished it in 3 years. They provided a warranty for 120 years. In Ukraine, we don't have even warranty that this bridge will be finished. Again, the same questions. Corruption? Most probably. Like, we know that EU also has corruption, and recent research of PricewaterhouseCoopers proves that. Inefficiency and professionalism, well, probably they have better situations than we in Ukraine. But going back to corruption problem, sorry for mess with the fonts. It usually happens when you provide not PDF but PowerPoint. But it is 99.1. It's a perception of Ukrainian business in 2014 they didn't believe that it is possible to win a contract in public procurement without giving a bribe. So almost 100% of businesses, according to survey back in 2014, said that we will not go to bid because everything is bought in your system. Again, going back to trust issue I raised in previous panel, it's a huge problem. It led to revolution. Of course, there were a lot of other reasons. But the first stage finished in 2014. And we saw actually the situation with corruption in the residence of our former president Yanukovych. It's a hall of his house. You see like gold, a lot of other stuff, luxury cars. So he has a residence of 140 hectares. Personal zoo, ostrich farm, golf court, a lot of ugly stuff. And since 2014, we have the principle everything is open for everyone, so basically everyone can visit his residence and see everything what is there. And at that time we saw, and we heard about open contracting partnership, who actually also promotes the principle that everyone sees everything, but in public procurement. And we saw, wow, great, we have to implement such a system. And starting from 2014, we are implementing this concept in public procurement system Prozoro. I don't want to spoil, I don't know whether you will be talking about DigiWiz survey about negative impact of transparency to public procurement. Will you? Then I will talk about it. So, DigiWiz survey proved that there is really strong negative impact to overall tender, like non-transparency. They said that after like a huge survey on like 35 countries, that like additional piece of information published will reduce single bidding and will increase saving. And overall, EU could potentially save about 6 billion euros annually just by increasing transparency in their public procurement systems. What Ukraine did, we opened everything. So there is not a single piece of information in our public procurement system Prozoro, which by the way is translated as transparently from Ukrainian. It's not Zorro who fights criminals and corruption, because actually Prozoro it's not an anti-corruption tool. It just helps to show what is happening in the system. But then responsibility to enforce its controlling authorities, its prosecution, but it's not public procurement system, and that is the reason why we still have a lot of problems inside of public procurement system in Ukraine. But we started in 2015, February, 16 tenders. Results from yesterday, 1.85 million transactions in our system, savings, opportunity to analyze everything, and I will just show you a short video. Okay, it's our business intelligence. So you want, for example, to analyze healthcare procurement. You pick time frame, you pick your region, you pick a city council, for example, where you live. You want to check healthcare procurement, okay, here is it. You want to check your hospital, you go to all tenders, and you have everything on your plate. Within, like, how many, 15 seconds or 20 seconds, you can check every particular procurement from every angle, 360 degrees. Prices, tender documentations, and so on and so forth. Again, not a single piece of information hidden from everyone. So that led us to increase in trust. In 2017, survey by USAID showed that now business actually trusts more to our public procurement system, 29% compared, I mean, its perception of corruption compared to 99%. We see that the changes are huge. Of course, it doesn't mean that actually there is no corruption in our system. There is a lot. But at least now it's perceived better. Then, business said that it became easier to work with our system, more than 90% of businesses. And small and medium businesses said that it helps to lower administration costs, it makes it easier to access the market, it lowers the time for participation, so it had really great impact to business. But we also developed a series of tools made of open data, which actually helps to improve efficiency of public spending for procuring entities, for efficiency of monitoring, for example, for state audit service. So it is a professional business intelligence tool which is now most actively used by state audit service. They can develop their own dashboards, dimensions, risk indicators, whatever they want to analyze and to identify most risky tenders in our system. Risk indicator system developed with our partners from EBRD. Again, all risky transactions are on the plate. Out of 1.85 million transactions, it is very complicated to find those which have to be monitored immediately. Open data gives us this opportunity, and in particular, open data structured in open contracting data standard. Best practice indexes. Again, you can compare your hospital with another hospital and to check whether your hospital performs better or not and what they have to do to improve themselves. We finally started making data-driven decisions. Our Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, when they develop legislation, they conduct researches based on our tools and based on data produced by Prozoro, structured in open contracting data standard. So you can immediately analyze everything, you can prepare a report within several minutes, you don't have to send a request for information to all institutions. If we're talking about interaction of civil society and public servants, everything is published by default. Now, public servants forgot about requests for information about public procurement, and it really reduced the time spent to work with all these papers. You already heard the experience from Mariupol city. This institution has more than 500 entities under their control. It is very complicated to control, to analyze efficiency of their spending without such a powerful tools which we could develop with open contracting data standard and open data. Now, having this business intelligence you just saw, they can see everything what is happening in every hospital, school, other municipal entity in their region to understand what to do to improve their performance, what to do, sometimes even to punish someone. We have a lot of positive examples. For example, our national post, Ukrpost, they have already saved more than 13 million euros. They have competition more than 3 bidders per one tender. Share of competitor procedures is more than 90%. And they have savings more than 30%. And it's real savings compared to marketplace prices, not to estimated value. So open contracting and open data brings you a lot of values and benefits. Increased competition, increased trust, better savings, better management of your procurement processes. And you have really to implement not open contracting data standard itself, but as I mentioned before, open contracting principles, because it's very important not only to build some IT tool, but to change perception, to change values, and to change approaches we work with public procurement. Thanks.
And I must I must advertise the fact that Victor will conduct a workshop after lunch. So do join their workshop. You'll probably see even more features of their amazing tools and the new ones without those other. I have a quick question, follow-up question to you. You are showing us the improvements made in the perception of businesses with regards to corruption or the lack of corruption in Ukraine. How about the perception of civil society? Because you are saying that, in your opinion, it's not exactly corruption-free. How do you use this tool, or how is it used by businesses in comparison with civil society organizations?
Yeah, so we have to distinguish here civil society organizations and like society in general, because if we check a survey from USAID, society perception is also improved. So about 70% perceive see improvements in public procurement spendings. And if we're talking about civil society organization, sometimes their perception became worse. Why? Because more transparency you have, more problems you see. And when you have a system when there is like also only 60,000 transactions, and out of that 60,000 you see like 2,000 problems, like you have, I know, 4%. But when you have 1.8 million transactions and your risk indicator system shows really a lot of problems, and now with such a transparency, more media are writing about tenders in public procurement, bad tenders in public procurement. And unfortunately, when in Ukraine we don't still have good enforcement, we don't have, for example, anti-corruption court which will close the loop, because we always joke that in Ukraine fighting with corruption is like a sport fishing. You catch the fish, you look at the fish, and you release the fish. That's what is happening with corruption in Ukraine. Of course, we're trying to change it. That is why actually in civil society organizations now, especially after the revolution, when we had a lot of opportunities and we really hoped for fast changes, now perception is becoming worse. But we have a lot of positive changes, and Prozoro, one of them.
Okay, thank you. Well, not the last. Well, you need to know something about DigiWist. Probably everybody that works in public spending monitoring is looking at what they did in the Czech Republic, mostly because they started from a very messy situation, if I may put it like this, with the data available, and they did their best to make this work. So we're here about the DigiWist experience, and my biggest challenge in pronouncing a name, Iri Skurovec. Please.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Everybody steals. That's what our Prime Minister says when it comes to public procurement. And actually, he's not the only one thinking it. It's a major part of, well, journalists and general public. Everyone, when it comes to discussing public procurement, everyone immediately, it boils down to issues of corruption and who got how much and who bribed whom. But, well, actually, this might not really be the case. My job, or our job as Zindex, as we feel it, is to prove our Prime Minister wrong. To show that, sure, there's maybe 10, maybe 20% of contracting authorities, of the people in public procurement professionals who are corrupt. But then there's also 70% who are doing just fine, and there's 10% of those who are really excellent at their job. Great municipalities, great hospitals, great ministries, whatever, who are actually spending the public money well. And you can never read about those in newspapers, which creates really this kind of atmosphere that everyone is depressed about how state manages his money. And we end up electing really stupid people because we still think that everyone before them stole, that everyone before them was corrupt. But, well, that's not really the case, or that's at least what we are trying to show at Zindex. So in a way, I would say we are not trying to battle corruption. That's for what other state bodies are. We are trying to show those 80% which are actually doing fine that they could be doing even better by showcasing them what's actually the good practice in public procurement. So, in a nutshell, public procurement eats 50% of the taxes. Everyone knows there is some kind of waste of corruption, but is there a way out? We have auditors, prosecutors, media pressure, and frankly, they don't do much about change of actual public procurement practice. Because yes, from time to time they put someone in a jail, but like I said, the problem is not just people stealing. The bigger problem, at least from our perspective in Czech Republic, is people being stupid, people being inefficient, people not caring about what gets purchased for the public money. And we decided that our project will be more about educating contracting authorities, at least those who don't want to primarily steal, but who are more struggling to follow the law or to purchase anything and not to get shamed on public. However, the motivation for our Zindex was following. The graph shows you share of negotiated procedures without publication in 2013. That's basically the direct award type of procedure when you are there is a matter of urgency or there are authorship rights or anything, which essentially force you to give contract to given company without any competition. For some strange reason, we in Czech Republic happen and still do to have really lots of these types of tenders. If we, as an NGO, come up with critiques saying, this is bad, we shouldn't directly award those tenders, then lots of people in lots of contracting authorities reply in a sense, well, so what? The law allows it for us to do something like that, so why shouldn't we? It saves us administrative costs and, there wouldn't be much of the competition anyways. But more importantly, there are huge differences between practice of different contracting authorities. Some of them are saying, so what, in 50% of cases of their public procurement. And some aren't doing this almost at all. And they have no clue that there are so huge differences. Yeah? So our job is to point out that, yes, there are some authorities which for some reason are able to plan their procurement and don't experience this urgency to give contracts without any competition too frequently. So I'm not going through all our rating. What we do is actually assign a rating to each contracting authority, looking at its tenders for past 3 years and telling, okay, they've been performing relatively well, relatively bad. Not in terms of corruption, but in terms of what is considered to be a good practice by European Commission, Transparency International, our ministries, etc. So the rating we do is really complex. We essentially work with, over 2,000 different data points and various data sets. I will talk about it later. But just to give you a glimpse of what we do is we are doing this really contracting authority centric because they are our target group. We want them to behave better, and we want to address their voters to know whether their mayor is doing a good job. So this is a short comparison of couple of key points, how we compare cities in Czech Republic. For instance, this is a comparison of city of Karlovy Vary, my hometown, and city of Prague. I've already spoken about direct awards, the ones in negotiated procedure without publication. In case of city of Prague, that's almost 40% of their contracts by volume. 40%, so roughly 140 millions of euros got directly awarded to, a couple of companies without any competition. While city of Karlovy Vary somehow managed to do it in a really tiny fraction of their contracts. And they have same law, basically same conditions. They are both cities purchasing similar stuff. So how come that Karlovy Vary performed better than Prague? It's so much better that it cannot be just coincidence. Second thing we are looking at is cancelled tenders, because that's quite important thing from the bidder point of view. You apply for a tender and it gets cancelled, and all the effort you have put into your bid gets wasted. Well, guess what? In city of Prague, over 1/3 of tenders get cancelled. In city of Karlovy Vary, we actually aren't much better. It's 29%. But again, there are a couple of cities in Czech Republic which don't need to cancel tenders almost at all. So typically the reason is that the tender was poorly prepared, and in the process they found out that the specifications are completely ill. And here the feedback to the contracting authorities would be, well, do prepare your tenders better, because otherwise you end up cancelling them over and over again. Another thing, well, average bidders count. There's, surprise, surprise, there's bigger competition in Karlovy Vary, again, by a huge difference. There's, in each tender in Karlovy Vary, there's 6 companies in average. In Prague, it's only 3.5. Publication errors, yes, city of Karlovy Vary has only errors in 24% of tenders published, while Prague has the same in 99% of the contracts. Last but not least, if we look at the budgets, we always have to ask, what are we missing? Because when looking at the published tenders, we only always see just maybe small piece of a picture of overall spendings. For instance, in city of Prague, if we look into their accounting, if we look at their volume of purchases, accounting-wise, it's 10 times bigger than what we actually see in public procurement. So all these figures I have just mentioned, that's the 10% of the money which actually has been spent according to the procurement law. And the remaining 90%, poof, no one knows. So here the feedback to Prague would be, get back, go to your purchasing processes and revise how come that you end up purchasing everything through other means than by following public procurement law. So in a nutshell, we give very detailed feedback to all the contracting authorities, and we hope that some of them are going to try to make better, and we are extensively communicating to them to make it happen. And well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've ranked, I will skip this, we publish many indicators. We've done this for cities, state offices, regions, and now we are going for cities again, because we want to make similar ranking public over and over again, so that citizens, media will get a track record on how the policymakers are working or not working in some cases. The impact so far, yes, we got major media attention each time we basically publish benchmarks of all the cities, of all the ministries, saying who's good, who's bad. We've seen big improvement in transparency of publication. Once you point out the mistakes, they really tend to fix it. We've seen changes of policies at individual buyers. However, the systemic improvement, the improvement where all the market would shift to behaving sort of better, well, that's for a long run, that's nothing you can change in 5 years, for which we are publishing this index. Lessons learned are, well, first, media coverage is needed to make policymakers aware, and direct communication with buyers is needed to make the actual people at the offices, actual public procurement professionals, aware of what's happening, and that's not really stupid NGO wanting them to get into jail, but, well, maybe also stupid NGO, but wanting to give them a feedback on what they are doing wrong. Secondly, it's nice, and journalists always ask about who are the worst, who is stealing the most, and lately we've decided not to tell them at all, because that's not the point of the rating. It's much better works to praise contracting authorities and praise given practices than saying, okay, City of Prague is the worst. Because, well, City of Prague has a thick skin and they are used to being criticized. But the good contracting authorities, those are the ones about whom you can never read in the papers, never hear in the media, because, well, no one really cares about the good ones. But they should, because if you want to make contracting authorities and not just the 10% on top, but the 80% who are not stealing but they are not sure what to do, if you want them to perform better, you need to point them to good examples. Tell them, okay, let's learn from city of Karlovy Vary, which is apparently doing something better than you. Now just short wrap up of how we do it. Well, we use data not just on public procurement, so OCDS wouldn't be enough. We also use data from buyer profiles, business registries, court decisions, political party donors, and well, a couple of state accounting registry, and a couple of others, which we combine into this big piece of rating. The nice and bad news simultaneously. There's no open data in Czech Republic. We basically tailor the software to extract all those data and to combine them sort of ourselves, which is sad news for Czech Republic that we don't have all the data in a nice and available format. But good news is in the sense that yes, this is doable, and it's not doable with some huge budget and big reforms of whatever. You can do it, of course, having OECD's data is great, but before you have them and before you have decent history, you can still do with your current data and current system as long as some data are public. So you can do with a couple of skilled programmers something similar to Zindex, for instance. Not the same, each country is different, but something similar can be definitely done. That's what our Prime Minister says when it comes to public procurement. And actually he's not the only one thinking it. It's major part of, well, journalists and general public. Everyone, when it comes to discussing public procurement, everyone immediately, it boils down to issues of corruption and who got how much and who bribed whom. But, well, actually, this might not really be the case. And my job, or our job as Zindex, as we feel it, is to prove our Prime Minister wrong. To show that, sure, there's maybe 10, maybe 20% of contracting authorities, of the people, public procurement professionals who are corrupt. But then there's also 70% who are doing just fine, and there's 10% of those who are really excellent at their job. Great municipalities, great hospitals, great ministries, whatever, who are actually spending the public money well. And you can never read about those in newspapers, which creates really this kind of atmosphere that everyone is depressed about how state manages his money. And we end up electing really stupid people because we still think that everyone before them stole, that everyone before them was corrupt. But, well, that's not really the case, or that's at least what we are trying to show at Zindex. So, in a way, I would say we are not trying to battle corruption. That's for what other state bodies are for. We are trying to show those 80% which are actually doing fine, that they could be doing even better by showcasing them what's actually the good practice in public procurement. So, in a nutshell, public procurement eats 50% of your taxes. Everyone knows there is some kind of waste of corruption, but is there a way out? We have auditors, prosecutors, media pressure, and frankly, they don't do much about change of actual public procurement practice. Because yes, from time to time they put someone in a jail, but like I said, the problem is not just people stealing. Bigger problem, at least from our perspective in Czech Republic, is, well, people being stupid, people being inefficient, people not caring about what gets purchased for the public money. And, well, we decided that our project will be more about educating contracting authorities, at least those who don't want to primarily steal, but who are more struggling to follow the law or to purchase anything and not to well, get shamed on public. However, the motivation for our Zindex was following. The graph shows you share of negotiated procedures without publication in 2013. That's basically the direct award type of procedure when you are there is a matter of urgency or there are authorship rights or anything, which essentially force you to give contract to given company without any competition. For some strange reason, we in Czech Republic happen, and still do, to have really lots of these types of tenders. Well, if we, as an NGO, come up with critique saying, you know, this is bad, we shouldn't directly award those tenders, then lots of people in lots of contracting authorities reply in a sense, well, so what? The law allows it for us to do something like that, so why shouldn't we? It saves us administrative costs and, well, there wouldn't be much of the competition anyways. But more importantly, there are huge differences between practice of different contracting authorities. Some of them are saying, so what, in 50% of cases of their public procurement. And some aren't doing this almost at all. And they have no clue that there are so huge differences. Yeah? So our job is to point out that, yes, there are some authorities which for some reason are able to plan their procurement and don't experience this urgency to give contracts without any competition too frequently. So I'm not going through all our rating. What we do is actually assign a rating to each contracting authority, looking at its tenders for past 3 years and telling, okay, they've been performing relatively well, relatively bad. Not in terms of corruption, but in terms of what is considered to be a good practice by European Commission, Transparency International, our ministries, etc. So the rating we do is really complex. We essentially work with, well, over 2,000 different data points and various data sets. I will talk about that later. But just to give you a glimpse of what we do is we are doing this really contracting authority centric because they are our target group. We want them to behave better, and we want to address their voters to know whether their mayor is doing a good job. So this is a short comparison of couple of key points, how we compare cities in Czech Republic. For instance, this is a comparison of city of Karlovy Vary, my hometown, and city of Prague. Well, I've already spoken about direct awards, the ones in negotiated procedure without publication. In case of city of Prague, that's almost 40% of their contracts by volume. 40%, so roughly 140 millions of euros, got directly awarded to, well, a couple of companies without any competition. While city of Karlovy Vary somehow managed to do it in a really tiny fraction of their contracts. So and they have same law, basically same conditions. They are both cities purchasing similar stuff. So how come that Karlovy Vary performed better than Prague? And so much better that it cannot be just coincidence. Second thing we are looking at is cancelled tenders, because that's quite important thing from the bidder point of view. You apply for a tender and it gets cancelled, and all the effort you have put into your bid gets wasted. Well, guess what? In city of Prague, over 1/3 of tenders get cancelled. In city of Karlovy Vary, we actually aren't much better. It's 29%. But again, there are a couple of cities in Czech Republic which don't need to cancel tenders almost at all. So typically the reason is that the tender was poorly prepared, and in the process they found out that the specifications are completely ill. And here the feedback to the contracting authorities will be, well, do prepare your tenders better, because otherwise you end up cancelling them over and over again. Another thing, well, average bidders count. There's, surprise, surprise, there's bigger competition in Karlovy Vary, again, by huge difference. There's, in each tender in Karlovy Vary, there's 6 companies in average. In Prague, it's only 3.5. Publication errors, yes, city of Karlovy Vary has only errors in 24% of tenders published, while Prague has the same in 99% of the contracts. Last but not least, if we look at the budgets, we always have to ask, what are we missing? Because when looking at the published tenders, we only always see just maybe small piece of a picture of overall spendings. For instance, in City of Prague, if we look into their accounting, if we look at their volume of purchases, accounting-wise, it's 10 times bigger than what we actually see in public procurement. So all these figures I have just mentioned, that's the 10% of the money which actually has been spent according to the procurement law. And the remaining 90%, poof, no one knows. So here the feedback to Prague would be, get back, go to your purchasing processes and revise how come that you end up purchasing everything through other means than by following public procurement law. So in a nutshell, we give very detailed feedback to all the contracting authorities, and we hope that some of them are going to try to make better, and we are extensively communicating to them to make it happen. And well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. We've ranked, I will skip this, we publish many indicators, we've done this for cities, state offices, regions, and now we are going for cities again, because we want to make similar ranking public over and over again, so that citizens, media will get a track record on how the policymakers are working or not working in some cases. The impact so far, yes, we got major media attention each time we basically publish benchmarks of all the cities, of all the ministries, saying who's good, who's bad. We've seen big improvement in transparency of publication. Once you point out the mistakes, they really tend to fix it. We've seen changes of policies at individual buyers. However, the systemic improvement, the improvement where all the market would shift to behaving sort of better, well, that's for a long run, that's nothing you can change in 5 years, for which we are publishing this index. Lessons learned are, well, first, media coverage is needed to make policymakers aware, and direct communication with buyers is needed to make the actual people at the offices, actual public procurement professionals, aware of what's happening, and that's not really stupid NGO wanting them to get into jail, but, well, maybe also stupid NGO, but wanting to give them a feedback on what they are doing wrong. Secondly, it's nice, and journalists always ask about who are the worst, who is stealing the most, and lately we've decided not to tell them at all, because that's not the point of the rating. It's much better works to praise contracting authorities and praise given practices than saying, okay, City of Prague is the worst. Because, well, City of Prague has a thick skin and they are used to being criticized. But the good contracting authorities, those are the ones about whom you can never read in the papers, never hear in the media, because, well, no one really cares about the good ones. But they should, because if you want to make contracting authorities, and not just the 10% on top, but the 80% who are not stealing, but they are not sure what to do, if you want them to perform better, you need to point them the good examples. Tell them, okay, let's learn from City of Karlovy Vary, which is apparently doing something better than you do. Now just short wrap up of how we do it. Well, we use data not just on public procurement, so OCDS wouldn't be enough. We also use data from buyer profiles, business registries, core decisions, political party donors, and, well, a couple of state accounting registry, and a couple of others, which we combine into this big piece of rating. The nice and bad news simultaneously. There's no open data in Czech Republic. We basically tailor the software to extract all those data and to combine them sort of ourselves, which is sad news for Czech Republic that we don't have all the data in a nice and available format, but good news is in the sense that, yes, this is doable, and it's not doable with some huge budget and big reforms of whatever. You can do it, of course, having OCDS data is great, but before you have them and before you have decent history, you can still do with your current data and current system as long as some data are public. So you can do with a couple of skilled programmers something similar to Zindex, for instance. Not the same, each country is different, but something similar can be definitely done without reforming all the systems first. Our findings, which we try to use to confirm that the direction where we are going are right, are that, well, only 1/3 of purchases of the cities are actually go through public procurement procedures, and the remaining 60%, who knows? In Ukraine, this probably will be more. I saw a figure of 88%, I think, at Victor's presentation. So good for Ukraine, but in most of the other countries, it's much less. In Germany, I would guess it's 5 to 10%, for instance. Second news: 50% of the tenders get cancelled or modified, which is a freaky thing for all the companies who try to apply for the tenders, because when looking at the new tenders, your chances that when you place the bid, you will come to bid evaluation are relatively slim, or well, it's for 50%. 30% of the political party donors are actually connected to public procurement. And I'm ending, and maybe most importantly, the institutions with good Zindex, with good rating, save over 5% per tender. So that's 5% of public money. I'll end with last piece of maybe good news, is that now we've finished the DigiWist project, extracting data from over 30 countries across EU, including Poland, for instance. And we are aiming to expand this kind of practice of benchmarking buyers to other countries. Of course, not everything could be exactly replicable. It will take time and effort to do something similar to Zindex, for instance, in Poland. We've seen example of similar effort in a previous presentation. But the point is, well, it's doable, and it's doable not in most of the countries, not just in Czech Republic. So I guess that's it, and thanks for your attention.
I also have a short advertising moment for Iri as well. He will also be present in one of the workshops this afternoon. So if you want to discuss more, you have the lunch, the breaks, and the afternoon workshops. Before we open the floor for your questions, I have an additional follow-up question for Iri, because you were talking about if somebody wants, okay. You were talking about the necessity to promote the good practices and so on and so forth. And earlier this morning, we've heard about the importance of a good advisor for the city of Gdańsk, which convinced the municipality to embark in this journey. If you were to advise a mayor to do open spending, open contracting at the local level, what would be the 3 things that he or she should take into consideration to make this effective, cheap, and interesting for the citizens?
First, I would tell him to talk to people. If we are opening the data, then there is users, and in every city there won't be hundreds of users. There will be like, well, 1 or 2 NGOs, and definitely also people inside his own building, inside his own office. So going to talk with them, what are their biggest needs and what are their biggest interests in what should be published, because there is many things to open up, and some of them might be high priority, some of them low. So start with talking with potential users, because otherwise you end up publishing lots of stuff which will just lie over there on the internet and do nothing. So what to focus on is the first thing you need to answer yourselves. Secondly, it's something that Victor has been already talking about. Well, publishing the data is nice, but and easy. And reforming the processes behind is the tough part. Sometimes you can start with publishing the data, because through that you can get additional feedback what might be wrong with the processes. So at one point, don't really think long term. Try to toy with what you have, talk with the people again and try to pinpoint what are the biggest problems. I mean, for the city of Prague, obviously that would be that everyone is avoiding legal procedures and doing the spendings otherwise through other means. So there, this would be a starting point. But there can be millions of different things in city of Gdańsk. So try to identify the weak spots and try to reform those. And that's it, I guess.
Thank you. Free advice for municipalities. So do we have questions? Where is the mic? I think I saw, oh, yeah.
I have a question for Yiri. We are aware of this index and we'll look through it, and one thing which is particular to EU is the way Directive 24 is applied to countries. So everything that is below the threshold that the EU says, it has different rules, right? But I'm just trying to figure out that 10% that you were talking about, which is over the threshold, and it has public procurement rules applied, so competition, some periods for applications and so on. So whatever is below, how it's actually being regulated. It's the national legislation, I suppose, but does it mean that 90% is direct procurement, or that some part of it is still competition-based and so on?
Definitely, it really depends on the country, but I'd say vast majority of the EU, there's also national law which more or less copies the directive. Therefore, you have below threshold procurement, which is certainly also competitive. Yeah, so it's not the top 10%, but in Czech Republic, generally it's something between 1/3, 1/2, which actually of the contracts which do follow the procurement law. But it really depends on the country. For instance, in Germany, almost nothing below the EU threshold gets published, whereas in countries like Portugal, Portugal or Georgia or Ukraine, lots of tenders, even the tiny ones, get published. So it's really, that's why I said you cannot take this index and apply it blindly in all the countries, because there are huge differences in the law, consequently in the data. So here you really have to think about, okay, what's in there, and try to work with it, because yes, sometimes you only see those top 10%, sometimes you see 80%. For most of the EU countries, including Poland, it's somewhere in the middle.
Can I ask you one additional question about percentage? It's the cancelled tenders. I'm just thinking, so there are different grounds for cancelling. And do you have additional information? What was the prime reason for cancelling? Because in Georgia, it's usually a lack of, so no suppliers at all that actually bid for the tender. And it's, I would say, 80% of the tenders that get cancelled or fail are those ones. And what about Slovakia?
I don't have the precise numbers, but I think in Czech Republic that would be 30 to 40%, the reason you have mentioned. And the other is less specified, but typically is the contracting authority realizing that from the bids, they realize a threat that they might not really get what they initially wanted, because they perhaps ill-specified, and they end up cancelling because of them. By the way, that even happens in case of the no valid bids case, because sometimes you get 3 bids and you examine them and you find out that they don't really fulfill the first criteria you specified. You wanted something and they offered you something else. Therefore, you discard the bids and end up saying, I have no valid bids, and cancel the tender. But it's still the case of well, we got something, but actually no one really offered us what we really wanted.
There's another question.
Gabriel Šípoš, Transparency International, Slovakia. Thank you for excellent presentations. I have perhaps a question for all 3 of you, at least definitely for Polish and Czech experiences. Simple question, what's the strongest predictor, which indicator is the strongest predictor of either corruption or of money being misspent? Thank you.
You mean in public procurement, yes? It's not an easy question. I mean, it depends on what definition of corruption you adopt. And I can imagine that it is not satisfactory. But for example, for DigiWist, as I said, I mean, there was a very broad definition of corruption adopted. It was defined as a particularistic distribution of resources. In terms of public procurement, it simply means money. And any circumstances, any condition that, that creates a situation when there is inequality to access to these resources should be treated as a corruption. It's radical, but I mean, there is a quite big amount of academic literature that can be brought here and support this. But of course, we won't resolve it. Maybe not all of you, but those who are working in anti-corruption, anti-corruption policies, we all know that there is a problem of definition for ages. But when we take this perspective, then I agree with DigiWist and I agree with Michał Fazekas, who was a big supporter of this approach, that actually lack of competitiveness and the single bidding is a quite strong predictor of corruption, especially that there is also quite amount of literature and research results, qualitative research results, which show that in most cases when there is no competition, this is the question of manipulation and conscious limitation of access to public procurement market. Of course, maybe it's not precise, it's not 0-1, but this is a sociology, I would say. I mean, we won't have strong predictors, I am afraid. But also one thing to mention, I mean, we shouldn't only focus on one indicator. We should look at this collectively, look at this one single bidding, for example, in correlation with political party financing, where there are such a data, and then we will have some broader picture of corruption. That's, I think, public opinion data. I mean, we should simply make this triangulation, we call it in social sciences. We should look from different angles.
Well, from my perspective, it's chasing the rabbit. Some indicators might work for some time. For instance, in Czech Republic, a couple of years back, worked anonymous ownership pretty well, and it showed pretty interesting results, but it doesn't anymore because, well, especially the corrupt guys are learning to cover their tracks, and they are always one step ahead, etc. So it's more about exploring the current practice, and I wouldn't say that there would be one prevailing indicator thing. So here I'm going to be a little bit skeptical. There's no magical tool which will solve it in all the countries. There's more people and analytics.
Yep. One small. I remember one of our talks with Michał Fazekas when he was talking to me, and maybe our colleague from Messina would comment on this, but he was showing me data how single bidding works in Sicily. And they have perfect competition, I mean, very much higher than in Poland, but everybody knows that public procurement in Sicily is not so, it doesn't look so well.
Yeah, I agree that you cannot identify like one or two most impactful indicators which shows to corruption or inefficiency. In our methodology, we have more than 150 red flags, out of which 44 are on production. You can check them on risk.dozoro.org. Different indicators show different thing. Combination of indicators could potentially show some real problems. But in our practice, we actually use combination not of indicators, but indicators together with feedbacks. The concept of our monitoring portal is every bidder could send anonymous or public feedback to any stage of procurement. And only after you get insight from like real person, then you can say that these indicators is really impactful, because machine unfortunately cannot analyze content of documents and make some decisions based on that. Only after people look at that, you can definitely say whether there is problem or not. And our concept is uniting people perception plus machine data.
We're out of time, so I would encourage you to find panelists in the breaks and attend the workshops that they will be in. I really enjoyed the discussion with you because I think we are all well aware that public procurement is not the sexiest thing there, and we will probably never have millions of people wanting to look over databases with contracts, right? But what we've learned today is that doing things is possible, that you can adapt and test and insist on making public procurement more open, and that we have some great examples in our region and that we should use them, adapt them to our local or national context. So thank you, and join me in a round of applause for that.